Blood. It stains the cold linoleum floor like spilled ink. A heartbeat is a fragile thing. It fades so quickly when a bullet tears through flesh. In the dark underbelly of this city, a dying man's life hangs by a single, fraying thread. He is the king of the streets, a ruthless predator, now reduced to a gasping body on a rusted operating table. But the real danger isn't the bullet inside him. It is the syringe filled with a lethal poison hovering right above his IV line. Before we reveal the one impossible choice that changed the fate of the entire criminal underworld forever, take a moment to subscribe to the channel, hit the notification bell, and drop a comment below, because you won't want to miss a single second of this dark, breathless journey. The rain beats against the frosted glass of the basement window, masking the sound of heavy boots in the hallway. Clara squeezes her eyes shut for a brief second, rubbing the bridge of her nose. The neon light above her flickers, buzzing like an angry insect. Another 12-hour shift in the shadows of the city. Another night of scrubbing blood off the floors and stitching up men who don't exist to the law. This is the underground clinic, a secret haven for monsters, criminals, and desperate souls. Clara is used to being invisible here. She is a plus-size woman in a world that prefers its women to take up as little space as possible. To the doctors, she is just a pair of heavy hands to carry medical supplies. To the criminals, she is just a shadow in a stained nurse's uniform. Her shoulders ache from the weight of a life she never wanted. Every month, the red notices arrive in her mailbox. The debt left behind by her late father is a mountain she can never climb. The loan sharks don't care about her tears. They only care about the interest. So, Clara works in the dark, collecting dirty cash to keep her head above water, ignoring the cruelty of the world around her. Dr. Vance, the chief surgeon of this miserable place, barks a cruel order from across the room. "Move faster, Clara. You're slow, you're clumsy, and you're costing me time," he sneers, not even looking at her. Clara swallows the lump in her throat and nods, adjusting her tight scrubs. She is tired of being the punchline. She is tired of being the girl nobody sees. Suddenly, the heavy metal doors of the clinic are kicked open with a violent crash. 3 men rush in, their expensive suits torn and soaked in deep crimson blood. "Get the doctor, now!" a tall man roars, pointing a trembling gun at Dr. Vance. In the middle of the panic is the man they are carrying, Don Alessandro, the undisputed leader of the city's most powerful mafia family. His face is pale, his sharp jawline covered in sweat and dirt. A massive gunshot wound gapes open near his ribs. Even on the brink of death, his presence fills the room with a suffocating, terrifying gravity. Dr. Vance freezes, his face losing all color. "Put him on the table. Clara, get the surgical tray." The clinic turns into a chaotic war zone of shouting and running. Clara moves instantly, her medical instincts overriding her fear. She cuts open Alessandro's expensive shirt, her hands pressing firmly against the wound to slow the torrential bleeding. Alessandro's eyes suddenly snap open. They are an intense, piercing gray, like a storm over a frozen ocean. He looks up, his gaze locking directly onto Clara's face. For a split second, he doesn't look at her with disgust or indifference. He looks at her as if she is the only anchor keeping him tied to the living world. His large, blood-stained hand reaches out, his fingers gripping her wrist with surprising, desperate strength. "Save me." His voice is a rough, gravelly whisper that vibrates through her very bones. "I've got you. Stay with me," Clara replies, her voice steady and calm despite the madness. Dr. Vance pushes her away roughly, taking over the operation. "Step back, you useless girl. Let a real professional handle this." Clara stumbles back, her heart hammering against her ribs. She watches from the shadows as Vance begins to work. The guards are ordered to wait outside to watch the entrance, leaving only Clara and the doctor in the operating room. The silence in the room becomes heavy, broken only by Alessandro's shallow, ragged breathing. Clara prepares a fresh bandage, but something stops her in her tracks. Dr. Vance isn't reaching for the antibiotics or the coagulant. His hand is trembling as he pulls a small, unmarked vial from his personal coat pocket. Clara knows every drug in this clinic. She knows the exact dosage of every sedative. The liquid in that vial is a lethal concentration of potassium chloride and heavy sedatives. It is a dose meant to stop a man's heart within seconds. She looks at Dr. Vance's face. His eyes are darting toward the door, a cold, calculating smirk touching his lips. He isn't trying to save the Don. He has been bought by a rival family. He is going to execute him on the table. "Doctor, what is that?" Clara asks, her voice barely a whisper. Vance flinches, turning around with a dark, menacing glare. "Shut your mouth, Clara. Turn around and mind your business if you want to live to see tomorrow." "You're going to kill him," she says, her eyes widening as the realization hits her. "He's a monster, and his death will pay off all my debts, and yours too, if you just keep your eyes closed," Vance whispers harshly, moving the needle toward Alessandro's IV line. Alessandro is unconscious now, completely defenseless, completely at the mercy of a traitor. Clara looks at the dying man. She looks at the doctor who has degraded her for years. In that fraction of a second, the invisible girl disappears. Clara grabs a heavy, solid, stainless steel medical tray from the counter. With all the strength in her body, she swings it forward. The heavy metal connects with the side of Dr. Vance's head with a sickening, loud crack. The doctor gasps, his eyes rolling back into his head as he collapses heavily onto the dirty linoleum floor, completely unconscious. The vial shatters into 1,000 pieces. Clara stands there, panting, the metal tray still shaking in her hands. She just struck a doctor. She just interfered in a mafia execution. Outside the door, heavy footsteps suddenly echo. The rival hitmen are coming, or perhaps Alessandro's guards are being attacked. Gunshots ring out from the front entrance of the clinic. The screams of dying men pierce the air. The clinic is compromised. If they find Alessandro here, he dies, and she dies with him. Clara looks at the large, heavy body of the Don. He weighs twice as much as her, a mountain of pure muscle and bone. But Clara is strong. Her body is built from years of hard physical labor and carrying heavy loads. She grabs Alessandro under his arms, pulling him off the operating table with a desperate groan. His head rests against her shoulder, his warm blood soaking into her nurse's uniform. She can hear the footsteps getting closer, right outside the operating room doors. There's no time to reach the back exit. The hallway is a trap. Clara looks across the room and sees the old industrial laundry elevator. It is used to send soiled linens down to the deep basement incinerator room. It is small, tight, and dirty. With a burst of adrenaline, she drags Alessandro across the floor, his boots leaving a thick trail of blood behind them. She shoves him into the metallic, cramped space of the laundry elevator. She squeezes her own body in right next to him, pulling the heavy, rusted metal gate shut just as the operating room doors are blown off their hinges by gunfire. Through the small slats of the elevator gate, Clara holds her breath. Two masked men in black tactical gear step into the room, their rifles raised. "The doctor is down! The target is gone!" one of them yells, kicking Dr. Vance's limp body. "Search the building! Find him! He can't have gone far! He's bleeding out!" the other shouts. Clara presses her body tightly against Alessandro in the pitch-black darkness of the elevator shaft. She can feel the frantic, erratic thumping of his heart against her chest. She places her soft, trembling hand over his mouth, praying he won't make a sound. The metallic smell of blood and the scent of his expensive cologne fill the tiny space. For the first time in her life, Clara isn't just an invisible girl hiding in the corner. She holds the life of the city's most dangerous man in her arms. The darkness of the laundry elevator feels like a tomb. Clara holds her breath, her eyes wide as she stares through the tiny gaps in the rusted metal gate. Outside, the heavy boots of the hitmen pace back and forth across the linoleum floor, just inches away from their hiding spot. "He's not here! Check the back exit! Move, move!" a harsh voice barks. The footsteps quickly fade away, followed by the distant sound of another heavy door slamming shut. Clara lets out a shaky, silent breath, but she doesn't dare move. The air inside the shaft is hot, suffocating, and thick with the heavy scent of copper and expensive cologne. Alessandro shifted slightly against her, a low, agonizing groan vibrating deep within his chest. "Shh, please," Clara whispers directly into his ear, her heart hammering wildly against her ribs. She keeps her hand pressed firmly over his mouth, feeling the intense heat of his breath against her palm. Every muscle in her body is tense, her arms wrapped around his massive shoulders to keep him upright in the cramped space. She can feel the sticky, wet warmth of his blood completely soaking through the front of her thin nurse's uniform. He is slipping away, his body growing heavier and colder by the second. If she stays here, he will bleed to death. If she leaves, the shooters might find them. Clara takes a deep breath, her mind racing as she makes a choice. She reaches out and grabs the cold, grease-covered chain of the manual elevator hoist. Using every ounce of strength in her arms and back, she pulls the heavy chain down, link by link. The old elevator creaks loudly, a terrifying sound in the silent building, as it slowly descends into the bowels of the basement. The lift hits the bottom with a dull, heavy thud. Clara pushes the rusted gate open, stepping out into the dark, damp boiler room of the clinic. This place is abandoned, filled with broken pipes and the steady drip of water echoing in the shadows. She drags Alessandro out of the elevator, his boots scraping against the concrete floor. With a desperate gasp, she manages to prop his massive body against a large, warm water pipe in the furthest, darkest corner of the room. She immediately drops to her knees beside him, ripping open her medical pouch. "Stay with me, Don Alessandro," she mutters, her voice fierce with determination. "I didn't knock out my boss just to watch you die down here." She uses a pair of trauma shears to cut away the rest of his ruined shirt, exposing the ugly, jagged entry wound near his ribs. The bullet is still inside, and the internal bleeding is severe. Working purely on instinct and adrenaline, Clara clamps the ruptured artery with a pair of sterile forceps she managed to grab from the operating room. Alessandro flinches violently, his large hands instantly swinging up to grip her wrists like iron bands. His eyelids flutter open, his striking storm-gray eyes wild and disoriented in the dim basement light. He glares at her, his vision blurry, his throat moving as he tries to find his voice. Who are you?" he rasps out, his grip tightening until her bones ache. "Did they send you to finish it?" "I'm the nurse who just saved your life from Dr. Vance," Clara says firmly, looking directly into his terrifying gaze without flinching. "Your doctor was a traitor. He tried to poison you. Now hold still, or you're going to bleed out on this concrete floor." Alessandro stares at her, his breathing ragged, his sharp mind trying to process her words through the thick fog of pain. He looks down at his chest, seeing the clamp expertly placed on his artery, and then looks up at her blood-stained uniform. He notes her full figure, her soft, round face covered in sweat and dirt, and the fierce, unyielding look in her eyes. Slowly, the tension leaves his massive body, and his hands slide down from her wrists, leaving dark, bloody smudges on her skin. "The doctor," he mutters, a dangerous, dark glint appearing in his eyes. "Where is he?" "Unconscious on the floor upstairs. I hit him with a surgical tray," Clara says bluntly, already packing the wound with sterile gauze. A faint, grim smirk touches Alessandro's pale lips for a fraction of a second before he groans in sheer agony. "You have guts, big girl," he whispers, his voice growing weaker as his head falls back against the cold pipe. "Don't talk. Save your strength," Clara commands, pressing her weight down on the gauze to stop the flow of blood. For the next 2 hours, Clara fights for his life in the dark, damp basement, using nothing but raw skill and a few basic supplies. She monitors his pulse, updates the dressing, and keeps him warm with an old, clean blanket from the laundry pile. Alessandro drifts in and out of consciousness, but every time his eyes open, they immediately lock onto Clara. He watches her closely, observing the gentle but steady efficiency of her hands, the way she doesn't shrink away from his intimidating size. To the rest of the world, she is a nobody, an invisible woman hidden in a miserable underground clinic. But to him, right now, she looks like an angel of mercy covered in crimson. Finally, the distant sound of heavy footsteps echoes from the basement stairs, followed by familiar voices calling out, "Don Alessandro! Boss! Are you down here?" Alessandro's eyes snap open, the cold, lethal authority instantly returning to his expression. "In the back," he calls out, his voice surprisingly loud and commanding despite his critical condition. A dozen heavily armed mafia guards burst into the boiler room, their weapons raised, led by Alessandro's loyal underboss, Marco. They freeze when they see the scene, their feared Don propped against a wall, and a plus-sized nurse kneeling in his blood, holding a bandage over his heart. "Boss!" "Thank God," Marco breathes a sigh of relief, quickly rushing forward. "The clinic was ambushed. Vance's men tried to wipe us out. We cleared the building." "Vance didn't work alone," Alessandro says, his voice dripping with pure ice. "He tried to put a needle in my arm. This woman stopped him." Marco looks at Clara, his eyes wide with a mixture of shock and sudden respect. "Get the cars ready," Alessandro orders, his eyes never leaving Clara's face. "And bring her with us." Clara blinks, shaking her head as she steps back. "No, wait. I can't go with you. My shift is over and I need to go home. I have things to take care of." Alessandro reaches out, his large, rough hand catching her wrist before she can pull away completely. His grip is no longer violent, but it is absolute. There is no negotiating with a man like him. "You saved my life, Clara," he says softly, his deep voice sending a strange, electric shiver down her spine. "The people who tried to kill me know who you are now. You go back to your normal life, and you die before sunrise." He pulls her slightly closer, his storm-gray eyes intense and burning with an immediate possessive focus. "You're coming to my estate. You're going to finish fixing me," he says, a dangerous promise in his tone. "And from this moment on, your life belongs to me." The black armored SUV glides through the iron gates of the massive estate, tearing through the rain-soaked night. Clara presses her forehead against the cool glass of the window, her hands trembling in her lap. She looks down at her uniform, ruined and stiff with dried blood, feeling utterly out of place in the luxurious leather interior. Beside her, Alessandro lies stretched out across the wide seat, his face dangerously pale, but his eyes wide open, watching her every breath. The car stops in front of a sprawling white marble mansion that looks more like a fortress than a home. Before the tires even stop rolling, a team of private doctors and guards in sharp suits surround the vehicle, opening the doors with military precision. "Careful with him," Clara snaps, her medical instincts instantly flaring up as two men try to lift Alessandro too quickly. "His stitches are fresh, and the arterial clamp cannot be disturbed until he is on a proper surgical bed." The private doctors freeze, looking at her full figure and her stained scrubs with clear disdain. But Alessandro raises a single heavy hand to silence them. "Do exactly as she says," Alessandro growls, his voice a low, lethal vibration that makes the men step back instantly. She commands the room. They carry him inside to a state-of-the-art medical wing, hidden on the upper floors of the mansion, far superior to the dirty clinic Clara left behind. For the next 4 hours, Clara refuses to leave his side, supervising the private surgeons as they finally remove the bullet and finish the delicate repair. She doesn't care about the luxury around her, nor does she care about the suspicious looks from the mafia guards. Her only focus is keeping the man alive. When the sun finally begins to rise, casting pale golden light through the massive arched windows, Alessandro is stable, resting in a grand master bedroom. Clara collapses into a plush velvet armchair near the foot of his bed, her body aching with absolute bone-deep exhaustion. She falls into a heavy, dreamless sleep, completely unaware of the eyes that open to watch her from the bed just an hour later. Alessandro stares at the woman sleeping in his chair, his gaze intense, calculating, and deeply fascinated. She isn't like the fragile, superficial women who usually try to claw their way into his world. She is soft, voluptuous, and possesses a quiet, unbreakable strength. When Clara finally stirs and opens her eyes, she finds Alessandro propped up against a mountain of silk pillows, his chest bare and bandaged. Standing at the edge of the bed are Marco and 3 other high-ranking mafia capos, all looking grim and deeply unsettled. "Leave us," Alessandro commands, his eyes locking onto Clara the moment her eyelids flutter open. The men bow their heads and exit immediately, shutting the heavy oak doors behind them with a soft click that sounds like a trap snapping shut. Clara sits up, smoothing down her wrinkled scrubs, her heart beginning to race as the reality of her situation sets in. "Come here, Clara," Alessandro says, his voice soft but carrying the weight of an absolute dictate. She walks over slowly, stopping a few feet from the bed, her chin held high despite the terrifying aura radiating from him. "How is your pain?" she asks professionally, trying to keep her voice steady. "The pain is nothing," he dismisses, dismissing it with a wave of his large, scarred hand. "We need to talk about why you are truly here." He leans forward slightly, the storm gray in his eyes darkening into something sharp and predatory. "My men did a background check on you this morning, Clara. They found everything." Clara's breath catches in her throat, her hands clenching into fists at her sides as fear cold as ice flows through her veins. "They found the massive debts your father left behind," Alessandro continues, his voice cutting through the silence of the room. "They found the loan sharks who have been tracking your every move, threatening to break your bones if you don't pay." He pauses, letting the weight of his words settle in the air between them. "You work in a dangerous underground clinic for pennies, surrounded by killers, carrying a debt you can never hope to repay in a lifetime." "I do what I have to do to survive," Clara says fiercely, her eyes flashing with sudden, defensive anger. "I am not a criminal." "No, you are a savior," Alessandro murmurs, his gaze sliding down her full, beautiful curves before returning to her face. But a savior with a very dark cloud over her head. He reaches into the drawer of his nightstand and pulls out a thick, leather-bound folder, tossing it onto the mattress between them. "Inside that folder is proof that I have bought every single one of your debts. The loan sharks answer to me now. Your father's name is cleared." Clara gasps, her hand flying to her mouth as her vision blurs with sudden, overwhelming tears. You paid it all?" "I don't like being in debt to anyone, Clara. You saved my life, so I saved your future," he says coldly. "But now, we must address the ultimatum." The temperature in the room seems to drop as Alessandro's expression hardens into marble. "You know my face. You know my enemies tried to kill me, and you know Dr. Vance was a traitor. You carry secrets that could destroy my empire if they fell into the wrong hands." He leans back, crossing his powerful arms over his chest, looking down at her like a king rendering judgment. "You have 2 choices before you today, Clara. You can take a check for your services, walk out those front gates, and try to hide from the rival families who are already looking for the nurse who saved Don Alessandro." He takes a slow, deep breath, his voice turning incredibly dark. "And I promise you, they will find you. They will torture you for information, and they will kill you." Clara swallows hard, the blood draining from her face. And the second choice? Alessandro's eyes blaze with a sudden, terrifying possessiveness that makes her entire body shudder. The second choice is you stay here, in my house, under my protection. You become my personal medical officer, my shadow, and my loyalty test. He steps out of the bed, ignoring the pain in his side, and stands directly in front of her, his towering height completely overshadowing her. He reaches out, his large fingers gently lifting her chin so she has no choice but to look into his burning eyes. But if you stay, your loyalty must be absolute. If you ever betray me, if you ever look at another man the way Vance looked at that needle, I will personally ensure your end is slow. He tilts her head up further, his thumb brushing against her lower lip. Answer me, Clara. Look into my eyes and tell me the truth. Are you a woman who can handle a monster like me? Or are you going to run? Clara looks into his storm-gray eyes, her breath catching as the sheer weight of his presence presses down on her. She doesn't pull away from his touch, even though every instinct tells her that this man is a dangerous fire that could consume her entirely. I have spent my whole life running from shadows and debts, Don Alessandro, she says, her voice turning remarkably steady, ringing with an inner strength that surprises even him. I didn't strike a traitor and drag you through a blood-soaked clinic just to surrender to fear now. I choose to stay. A slow, dark smile spreads across Alessandro's sharp face, a terrifyingly beautiful expression that sends a jolt of pure heat straight to her core. A wise choice, Clara, he whispers, his thumb tracing the soft line of her jaw one last time before he finally steps back. From this moment on, you are untouchable. My enemies are now your enemies, and my shield is your protection. He turns to the door, raising his voice slightly to summon his underboss. Marco, get in here. The heavy doors swing open instantly, and Marco steps into the room, bowing his head respectfully toward the Don. Get her cleaned up. Clear out her old apartment. Burn her old clothes, and ensure she has everything she needs, Alessandro commands, his voice dripping with absolute authority. And call the city's finest designers to the estate tonight. My personal medical officer will not dress like a peasant anymore. Within an hour, Clara is shown to a breathtakingly grand guest suite, complete with a massive marble bathroom and a bed lined with pure silk. She strips away her blood-soaked nurse's uniform, stepping into a steaming hot shower that washes away the terror, the sweat, and the grime of the underground clinic. As she dries off and wraps herself in a thick plush robe, a sharp knock echoes at the double doors of her bedroom. When she opens them, she finds a team of high-end fashion designers standing in the hallway, looking nervous, accompanied by racks of expensive fabrics and garments. A sharp-faced head designer steps forward, looking at Clara's full, voluptuous figure with a critical, disapproving scowl. Ah, yes, the guest, the designer murmurs, clicking her tongue as she pulls out a loose, shapeless gray wool coat and a baggy dress. We will need to hide these extensive proportions. Dark, loose layers are best to camouflage the excess. Clara's heart sinks into a familiar, painful ache. She has spent her whole life listening to people tell her to hide her body, to mask her curves, to act as if she shouldn't take up space. Suddenly, a cold, powerful shadow falls over the threshold of the room. Alessandro stands in the doorway, dressed in a sharp, tailored black suit, leaning slightly against the frame with his arms crossed over his chest. His eyes are fixed on the designer, flashing with a lethal, icy rage that makes the entire styling team instantly freeze in terror. What did you just say? Alessandro's voice is a low, dangerous growl that vibrates through the entire room like distant thunder. The head designer pales, her hands shaking as she holds up the baggy gray coat. I was just saying, Don Alessandro, that for a woman of her size, it is best to conceal. Silence! Alessandro cuts her off, stepping into the room with an aura so suffocatingly intense that the air seems to leave the space. He walks directly up to the designer, ripping the loose gray garment from her hands and tossing it onto the floor like a piece of worthless garbage. You speak to her with respect, or I will have your tongue cut out before the sun sets, he says softly, his tone completely calm but infinitely deadly. He turns his head slowly, his storm-gray eyes locking onto Clara, sweeping over her full hips, her lush waist, and the soft curves of her body with an intense, unvarnished hunger that makes her skin flush with heat. She is a masterpiece, Alessandro says, his deep voice carrying a fierce, undeniable pride. Her body is perfect. I do not want her hidden in rags meant for old women. He steps closer to the styling racks, dragging his large hand across the expensive fabrics until he finds a bolt of deep royal blue silk and a roll of heavy, rich crimson velvet. You will design gowns that embrace her curves. You will cut the fabric tight to highlight her waist and proud around her hips, he orders, turning back to the trembling designers. She will wear silk, she will wear velvet, and she will take up every single inch of space she damn well pleases. If I see a single piece of baggy clothing on her tomorrow, your business closes forever. The designers nod frantically, bowing and apologizing as they quickly scramble to grab their measuring tapes, completely terrified of the Don's wrath. Clara stands there, her breath trapped in her throat, her chest heaving as she stares at Alessandro in utter shock. Nobody has ever defended her like this. Nobody has ever looked at her body as something to be celebrated, let alone worshipped. Alessandro walks over to her, ignoring the presence of the designers, and stops just inches from her face, his gaze burning into hers. Never let anyone tell you to hide, Clara, he whispers, his voice thick with a dark, growing obsession. You saved a king. It's time you start dressing like you belong by his side. The following weeks pass in a blur of luxury, but the peace is a fragile illusion. Clara adapts quickly to her new life inside the fortress, ensuring Alessandro's wound heals flawlessly, her medical expertise keeping him in perfect health. Every evening, she dines with him, wearing the stunning, custom-made velvet and silk gowns that accentuate her lush, breathtaking curves. Alessandro looks at her not as a servant, nor just as a nurse, but with an intense, burning obsession that grows more dangerous by the day. But the dark underworld never sleeps, and a king's enemies do not forget a slight. On a rainy Tuesday afternoon, Alessandro leaves the estate for a high-stakes meeting with the syndicate heads, leaving Clara under the watch of his elite guards. Clara is in the private medical wing, organizing supplies, when the high-tech security lights suddenly flash blood red. The deafening roar of explosives echoes from the front gates, shaking the very foundations of the mansion. Before Clara can even run to the door, the glass windows shatter into a million pieces as heavily armed men in tactical gear storm the room. The estate guards fight brutally, but they are outnumbered. The rival family, led by a ruthless capo named Victor, has launched a full-scale assault. Clara is grabbed roughly by her arms, her crimson velvet gown tearing slightly as she is dragged out of the room. "Look what we have here," Victor sneers, gripping her chin tightly as his men clear the hallway. "The Don's precious little plus-size nurse, the one who ruined our plans at the clinic." Clara doesn't scream, nor does she beg for mercy. She stares back at him with fierce, unyielding defiance. "Alessandro will tear you apart for this," she spits out, her voice cold and steady despite the terror clawing at her throat. "He won't do anything, because you are going to give us the access codes to his private vault and his syndicate ledger." Victor laughs darkly, shoving her toward a waiting armored van outside. They blindfold her and transport her to an abandoned, cold meatpacking warehouse on the edge of the city. Clara is tied securely to a heavy metal chair in the center of the freezing room, surrounded by dozens of rival hitmen. Victor steps forward, pulling out a wicked, gleaming blade, pressing the cold steel right against her soft cheek. "Tell me the codes, big girl, or I will start carving up that pretty, soft face of yours," he threatens, his breath foul against her skin. Clara swallows hard, her heart hammering wildly against her ribs. But she remembers the oath of loyalty she gave to Alessandro. She remembers the man who looked at her with worship, who cleared her debts, and who made her feel visible for the first time in her life. "I am a nurse," Clara says, her voice echoing with a chilling, powerful calm through the empty warehouse. "I know exactly where the carotid artery is. If you want to kill me, do it. But I will never betray him." Victor roars in frustration, raising his hand to strike her across the face. Suddenly, the massive iron doors of the warehouse are completely blown off their hinges with a catastrophic, earth-shattering explosion. The concrete floor vibrates as the dark, imposing figure of Don Alessandro steps through the thick smoke, holding a golden-plated assault rifle. He is flanked by 50 heavily armed mafia soldiers, his storm-gray eyes glowing with a feral, terrifying madness. The moment Alessandro's eyes lock onto Clara, seeing the rope cutting into her skin and the faint scratch on her cheek, his face hardens into pure, unadulterated malice. "Kill every single one of them," Alessandro orders, his voice a low, vibrating growl of a monster unleashed. "But leave Victor for me." A brutal, chaotic bloodbath ensues. The warehouse echoes with the deafening sound of gunfire and the agonizing screams of Victor's men. Alessandro moves through the room like the god of death, dropping enemies with lethal precision until only Victor is left, bleeding and crawling on the floor. Alessandro drops his weapon, stepping forward and grabbing Victor by his collar, lifting the man effortlessly into the air. "You dared to touch what is mine," Alessandro whispers, his voice dripping with icy venom as he drives a heavy fist into Victor's face, breaking his jaw instantly. He throws the broken capo onto the floor, stepping heavily onto his chest until the bones crack beneath his expensive leather boot. "No one touches my woman and lives to see the sunset," Alessandro roars, drawing a silver pistol and ending Victor's life with a single, definitive shot. The room falls dead silent, save for the heavy, ragged breathing of the dawn. Alessandro turns around instantly, his terrifying expression melting away into deep, frantic worry as he rushes toward Clara. He cuts her ropes with a pocket knife, his large, trembling hands cupping her face as he pulls her tightly against his massive chest. "Are you hurt? Tell me you're all right, Clara," he begs, his voice thick with a raw emotion he has never shown to anyone. Clara buries her face in his neck, wrapping her arms around him tightly. "I'm okay. I didn't tell them anything. I kept my promise." Alessandro kisses her forehead, his grip tightening around her full waist as if he will never let her go again. "You are stronger than all of them combined," he whispers fiercely, his obsession turning into absolute, permanent devotion. "And now the world will know exactly who you are." The ride back to the estate is silent, but it is a silence charged with an entirely new, powerful energy. Alessandro keeps his arm wrapped tightly around Clara's shoulders, his large hand resting protectively against her waist, pulling her full body flush against his side. He doesn't care about the blood on his clothes or the chaos left behind. His only focus is the woman who chose torture over betraying his name. The very next evening, the grand ballroom of the mansion is illuminated by 1,000 crystal chandeliers, casting a brilliant glow over a sea of expensive suits and diamond gowns. Every major syndicate boss, every powerful family leader, and every high-ranking capo in the city has been summoned under strict orders from the Don. The room murmurs with nervous whispers as the guests wonder why the ruthless king of the underworld has called an emergency gathering after such a brutal bloodbath. Suddenly, the grand double doors at the top of the marble staircase swing open, and the entire ballroom falls into a dead, breathless silence. Alessandro steps forward, looking dominant and fierce in a flawless black tuxedo, but he isn't walking alone. By his side is Clara, looking absolutely breathtaking in a custom-made, floor-length gown of deep, rich crimson velvet that fits her like a second skin. The dress proudly accentuates her full hips, her lush waist, and the gorgeous, voluptuous lines of her body, making her look like a goddess carved from royalty. She holds her head high, her eyes sparkling with a quiet, unbreakable confidence, completely unafraid of the hundreds of powerful people staring up at her. Alessandro leads her down the staircase slowly, his hand resting firmly on the small of her back, guiding her through the crowd that parts before them like the Red Sea. They reach the center stage of the ballroom, and Alessandro steps forward, his storm-gray eyes sweeping over the crowd with a cold, absolute authority. Many of you have heard rumors about the ambush at the clinic and the attack on my estate. Alessandro's deep, booming voice echoes off the high ceilings. Many of you thought I was weak, that I was vulnerable, and that you could use my secrets to tear down everything I have built. He turns slightly, extending his hand to Clara, who steps forward to stand proudly right beside him, taking up her rightful space in the world. But you forgot that a king is only as strong as the one who guards his heart, Alessandro declares, his voice ringing with fierce pride and devotion. This woman saved my life when a traitor held a blade to my throat. She withstood my enemies. She protected my secrets. And she proved that her loyalty is grander than any army you could ever bring against me. He reaches into his pocket and pulls out a stunning, heavy platinum ring, set with a massive, flawless blood-red ruby, surrounded by a halo of diamonds. Before the entire criminal underworld, the feared and merciless Don Alessandro drops to one knee, looking up at Clara with total, unvarnished worship in his eyes. Clara, you spent your life being invisible to a world that didn't deserve to see you, he whispers, his deep voice carrying a rare, profound emotion that captivates everyone in the room. But to me, you are the entire world. Will you stand by my side, rule this empire with me, and become my queen? Tears of pure joy and triumph well up in Clara's eyes as she looks down at the powerful man kneeling before her full, beautiful form. Yes, Alessandro, she whispers clearly, her voice steady and proud. I will. He slides the heavy ring onto her finger, standing up to press his lips against hers in a deep, passionate kiss that seals their fate forever. The ballroom erupts into a thunderous applause as every single mafia boss, capo, and soldier bows their head in deep respect to the new ruler of the streets. Clara looks out at the crowd, no longer the poor, invisible nurse hidden in the shadows of a debt-ridden life, but a powerful woman worshipped by a king. Before we say goodbye to Clara and Alessandro, I have one final question for all of you watching tonight. Would you risk everything and step into the dark world of a monster if it meant finding a love that completely changes your life? Let me know your thoughts in the comments below. Make sure to like this video and share it with someone who loves a thrilling, breathless romance.